In 1994, Rwanda experienced one of the most devastating humanitarian catastrophes of the 20th century. What unfolded over the course of roughly 100 days was not simply violence, but a systematic and organized genocide that resulted in the deaths of between 500,000 and 1 million people. Entire communities were wiped out, social structures collapsed, and fear spread across every part of the country. Around 1/3 of the population fled across borders into neighboring nations, creating a massive refugee crisis. Infrastructure was left in ruins, institutions disappeared, and the economy effectively imploded, shrinking by nearly 50% in a single year. By any reasonable or objective measure, Rwanda in 1994 was not just a struggling developing country. It was a state on the brink of complete collapse, barely functioning in any meaningful sense. And yet, fast forward just 3 decades, and Rwanda is being compared to Singapore, one of the most successful and efficient economies in modern history. At first glance, this comparison might seem exaggerated or even unrealistic, but when you look closer, it becomes easier to understand where it comes from. Kigali, the capital city, is now widely recognized for its cleanliness, organization, and rapid modernization. The economy has shifted away from reliance on raw commodities and is increasingly driven by services, finance, and technology. Corruption levels are tightly controlled relative to regional standards, and bureaucratic processes have been streamlined to the point where businesses can be registered within hours. In global rankings, Rwanda has climbed to 38th place in ease of doing business, surpassing countries such as the Netherlands, Belgium, and Italy, something that would have seemed unimaginable just a few decades earlier. The macroeconomic data reinforces this transformation. Over the past decade, Rwanda's GDP has grown at an average rate of nearly 7% annually, placing it among the fastest-growing economies on the African continent. Extreme poverty has declined significantly, falling from 11.3% in 2017 to approximately 5.4% today. Life expectancy has also improved dramatically, rising from just 46 years around the year 2000 to roughly 67 years within a single generation. For a country of about 14 million people with no coastline, no oil reserves, and no obvious geographic advantages, this level of progress is not just impressive. It is genuinely remarkable. However, describing Rwanda as the Singapore of Africa overlooks some important realities and risks oversimplifying a much more complex situation. Singapore's GDP per capita is around $90,600, while Rwanda's sits closer to $1,000. That gap is enormous. Singapore did not just become an attractive place for businesses. It also developed into one of the highest standards of living in the world. These two outcomes, while related, are not automatically connected. A country can be business-friendly without delivering widespread prosperity to its population. So before fully embracing or dismissing the comparison, it's worth asking a few deeper questions. How does a country move from near-total collapse to being mentioned alongside one of the most successful economies ever built? What does it actually mean to create a business-friendly environment in practice? And perhaps most importantly, does that environment necessarily lead to long-term prosperity for the broader population? Finally, what would Rwanda need to achieve in order to genuinely match the level of development seen in Singapore? To answer these questions, we need to go back to July 1994, when the Rwanda Patriotic Front took control of the country. What they inherited was not just a damaged economy, but a nation that had essentially stopped functioning. Government institutions had collapsed, poverty affected roughly 78% of the population, GDP had been cut in half, and there was no meaningful tax system or private sector to speak of. The state, in many ways, had to be rebuilt from scratch. Instead of focusing on retaliation, despite enormous internal and external pressure to do so, the new leadership under Paul Kagame made a deliberate and strategic decision to prioritize stability above all else. One of the most significant steps was the abolition of ethnic classifications that had fueled the genocide, replacing them with a unified national identity. While this approach has been criticized for limiting political opposition, restricting press freedom, and consolidating power, especially given election results that have reached nearly 99%, it did create a stable environment in which long-term planning became possible. From an economic standpoint, that stability was absolutely critical. It became the foundation upon which all future growth and development were built. In the years following the genocide, Rwanda became one of the largest recipients of foreign aid per capita in East Africa. At its peak, the country was receiving over $700 million annually, which equates to roughly $120 per person. At one point, foreign aid financed nearly 40% of the national budget. For a country starting from almost nothing, this external support acted as a crucial scaffold, allowing for the reconstruction of roads, schools, hospitals, and essential infrastructure. However, foreign aid alone cannot sustain long-term development. Rwanda recognized this early and began pushing aggressively towards self-sufficiency. In 2000, the government introduced Vision 2020, an ambitious long-term development strategy aimed at transforming the country from a low-income, agriculture-based economy into a knowledge-based, service-oriented one within 2 decades. A central component of this transformation was the development of a domestic tax system. The Rwanda Revenue Authority, established in 1997, quickly became one of the most efficient and professional tax agencies in the region. As a result, tax revenue as a percentage of GDP increased from under 10% in the late 1990s to approximately 14 to 16% in recent years. While that may not seem particularly high by developed country standards, within sub-Saharan Africa it represents strong performance. This increase in domestic revenue significantly improved fiscal independence. By 2017, Rwanda was able to finance more than 60% of its national budget internally, compared to just 39% in 2000. This shift is especially notable given that less than a decade earlier, the country had no functioning financial system at all. With a more stable economic foundation in place, growth followed. Between 1996 and 2002, GDP expanded at an average annual rate of 9.5%, driven largely by reconstruction efforts. Although growth slowed slightly as the country transitioned from rebuilding to development, it remained consistently strong. What truly sets Rwanda apart, however, is not just its recovery, but the ambition of what came next. The country made a deliberate effort to reshape how it was perceived globally. Instead of being defined solely by its past, Rwanda repositioned itself as a stable, forward-looking economy focused on innovation and opportunity. This rebranding effort was not just symbolic, it was backed by tangible institutional reforms. In 2008, Rwanda ranked below 140th globally in ease of doing business. By 2019, it had climbed to 38th, one of the fastest improvements ever recorded. Today, entrepreneurs can register a business in a matter of hours through digital systems, and processes like property registration, which once took nearly a year, now take around a week. Despite these improvements, challenges remain. Rwanda's landlocked geography creates significant logistical costs. Transporting goods from the port of Mombasa to Kigali can cost several times more than shipping them from Asia to Africa in the first place. The domestic market is relatively small, access to financing remains limited, and regulatory enforcement can sometimes be inconsistent. Nevertheless, Rwanda is positioning itself as a regional hub, a base for companies looking to access a broader East and Central African market of more than 300 million people. This strategy closely mirrors the role Singapore played in Southeast Asia. There are already signs that this approach is working. The service sector now accounts for roughly half of Rwanda's GDP, with strong growth in finance, technology, and business services. Kigali has developed an international financial center, a growing technology ecosystem, and even hosts a campus of Carnegie Mellon University. However, outside Kigali, the situation is more complex. GDP per capita remains low, a significant portion of the population still lives in poverty, and agriculture continues to employ around 40% of the workforce. This highlights a key reality. Rwanda has built a strong foundation, but the transition to a fully developed, high-income economy is still in progress. Ultimately, comparing Rwanda to Singapore is a comparison between potential and achievement. Singapore benefited from strategic geographic positioning as a global shipping hub, something Rwanda cannot replicate due to being landlocked. Logistics, education, export diversity, and political structure all present ongoing challenges. And while Rwanda has made extraordinary progress, its future trajectory will depend on how effectively it addresses these structural limitations. What is clear, however, is that Rwanda's transformation is one of the most remarkable economic recovery stories in modern history. Whether or not it ultimately becomes the Singapore of Africa, the progress it has already achieved is nothing short of extraordinary.